This is part 4 of Introduction to 3D Studio Max, building the death scene. And we are going to create the Mac keyboard now. So this is the reference image I'm going to be using. And these are the dimensions, basically 17 inches by 4.5 inches. Okay. Now I downloaded the reference image and I opened it up into Photoshop. You can use GIMP or any other program, but I want to crop this. So I'm going to go to my crop tool here and drag this down. So let's say that's good. And hit enter on the keyboard. And that's good enough. So I'm going to go ahead and go File, Save, click OK. And I'm going to quit Photoshop. Okay, so in my 3D Studio Max, I'm going to select everything, right click, hide selection. I'm going to go to my Create panel and use plane. And in my top viewport, I'm going to draw a plane. Go to my Move tool, set the XYZ to 0, 0. I'm going to hit this button here to zoom extent to frame everything. Now in my Modify panel, the length is going to be set to 4.5 inches. And my width is going to be set to 17 inches. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and open up Material Library. And I'm going to just replace the Apple one. So I'm going to click and drag this blank spot over the M to clear it out. Go back to my folder and drag and drop my reference image in. And drag and drop it to my plane. And make sure this is checked so I can see it in the viewport. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to change wireframe my top view to shaded. All right, so here's my keyboard. Let's start modeling it. So I'm going to go to my Create panel, Box. I'm going to draw a box, just like that. And the height, let's see here, the width, let's go 6. It's probably 0.6 by 0.6. By 1.15. Okay, so it looks like it's a little bit wider. So let's go 6.5. There we go. Okay, so like we've done before, nothing new. I'm going to add an Edit Poly modifier because I need to create the round edges. So Edit Poly, go to Edge Mode, select one edge. I'm going to make sure edge face is on. And I'm going to go ring. And now you're going to actually apply the chamfer modifier. In my case though, I'm going to add the chamfer modifier if you already have it, if you have it. So I'm going to set the value to 0 and just dial it up. Now it's set to quad. I'm going to do standard and increase the segments. It looks good. Nice and round. Okay. Now, if you really want to get technical, you would probably want to add a little bit of a bevel on the top here. So what I would do is just add another Edit Poly modifier. Go to Edge Mode. Select this edge. In fact, actually, let me just drag select over the side. Hold down Alt. Drag over. So I just have the top edges. And we're going to go chamfer. Let's just add it. Chamfer. And let me decrease the amount again. It's going to be 0.05. Yeah. Just a real tight chamfer. Now, that is going to increase poly count a ton, and it might end up slowing down your scene. So I'm just saying if you want to be really technical, you can go that far down, but I'm not. So I'm going to go ahead and delete those two top options. Now, I almost forgot to sit there and mention the reason why I added an Edit Poly modifier first to select the edges is because you can see here that there's this little icon that means that I had activated Edge Mode and that the Edge Mode is controlling my chamfer. So anytime I have a sub-object mode, which is the Edit Poly modifier, and I'm selecting something sub-object, it will only apply on my stack to the object above. So that's really, really cool. It's a very, very useful tool when it comes to modeling. And I think that works. So let's go ahead and copy this over, and it's going to be copied over a bunch. So I'm going to hold down Shift, drag it over. Let's say to about there. I'm going to call it an instance. Probably should have renamed this. Let's say number. First off, let's go MACK for keyboard, num for number, K, I guess, I don't know. This is gonna be 0, 2. So I want, let's just do a bunch. Click OK. Oh wow, right on the money. So some of these are going to have to get, whoa, Control Z. By the way, I don't want to be moving around my reference image, so I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to go to Object Properties, and I'm going to say Freeze, and I'm going to turn off Show Frozen in Gray. Click OK. So now I can't select my reference image. Okay, so I can adjust some of these, move them over. So this is all based off of how picky you want. Now I'm not going to sit there and record me modeling out every single one of these buttons. That's just crazy because it's the same technique over and over again. So like this one is a slightly different shape. So I'm going to hold down Shift, drag it over. Instead of being an instance, I'm going to set this as a copy. And Mac K key is going to say delete. Click OK. And now I can go back to my box and actually increase the width. And with this button selected, I can see what's going on in my stack. So that's very nice. Okay. And that's all you have to do. You just got to take these buttons now and hold down Shift, copy them over. Click OK. Scale this, oops. Control Z. I want to go back to box. It's not the width I need to work on this one. It's the... There we go. Okay, it seems like the chamfer is going to be a little bit less too. Something like that. Looks good. If you hit, I think it's Control X. Nope. Control X is export mode. Alt X allows you to see through the object. Makes the object see through. Again, that's Alt X on the keyboard. So that looks good. And it looks like all these buttons are exactly the same size. So let's just hold down Shift, drag it over. Instance. Do a bunch. And we're going to call this MAC keyboard top B. Click OK. And of course I would go through. Looks like I almost had enough. These look like they might be a little bit shorter. Oh, maybe not. And looking good. Need to follow this through. Okay, these are definitely shorter. So let me go into edit box. Oh yeah, because this is an instance, it's changing all of them. So let me undo that. Control Z, Control Z. Let me delete this one. Hold down Shift. Set it to copy. Okay, hold down Shift, drag it over 3. There we go. Oops. Okay, so that's basically what you're going to do. Nothing special. Go ahead and go through and build out all the keys, and then I'll pick this up with creating the board, and we'll cut the hole and so on and so forth. Okay, I'm picking back up. I created all the buttons that I could. And just to give you a heads up, every place I can create an instance, I made it an instance, and every place that I had to make a copy, I make a copy. But trust me, you want to make as much instances as possible. Okay, so let's see here. Moving forward, let's go ahead and create the base box. So I'm going to go back to the Modify panel. I'm going to create a box. And actually, do I need to really create another box? Probably not. You just select one of these keys, let's say the space bar, and I'm going to hold down Shift and drag it up. I'll call this base Mac key BASE. Okay. So let's go ahead and set the XYZ to 0 and 0. Take the width. Oops, I created an instance, not good. So I'm going to Control Z, delete, hold down Shift, drag it up, make sure I set it to copy. Mac K base. 0, 0. Dial this way up. There we go. And way out. It's about there. Let's take a look at the corners. That actually looks about right. Nope, needs to be chamfered more. So go up to chamfer, increase the chamfer amount and the width. What was it like? What was the dimensions? 17. There we go. And this was 4.5. Perfect. All right, so that's the base. Let me scoot it down just a bit. Actually, how do I want to do this? I'm going to grab everything. So I'm going to drag select over everything. I'm going to hold down Alt on the base. Actually, no, let's just go ahead and decrease the base height. And I think somewhere in here had the height. 0.58. 5/8 of an inch. So let me drag this down. And these keys don't go that much above the keyboard. Probably something like that. Okay. Looks good. So now what I could do is select everything and then hold down Control to deselect the base. I'm going to hold down Shift, make a copy of these buttons and drag them up for now. Click OK. These are definitely going to be set to a copy. Now the base ones, in fact, actually, let me pull them way off so they're not my way. And let me move this down so I can select all these keys. In fact, actually, I just need to select one. I need to attach all these keys because these are what's going to be what I cut into this board. So I'm going to right click and say, ooh, do I want to do it to these or these? Because these are copies. It doesn't matter. Let's do it to the base ones. Okay. Right click, collapse all. Yes. And I'm going to go attach and start clicking through. I was hoping I can drag select, but I know you can go into the attach menu and select by name, but I've got two sets of keys that are named the same. So definitely don't want to do that. Sorry, should have paused the tutorial for this. Oops, I just selected the base, Control Z. Definitely don't want the base. Okay, there we go. Key cut. Turn off attach. Make sure nothing was selected that wasn't supposed to. Now I can set, let's see here, the keys are all together. Let's set this guy back down to 0. Let's go back to the keys. And let's go into polygon mode. Select all the polygons. And go to scale and scale them up a little bit. Should be good. Hopefully that's enough. Yeah, that should be good. Okay, so scale them up. Let's test this out. So I'm going to save this real quick before I do it. Save. Click on the keyboard, and we're going to collapse everything. Yep. And I'm going to go to the Modify panel, Compound Objects, Pro Boolean, start picking, and pick the buttons. And watch the system crash. I'm going to pause this and let it, oh, nope, there we go. It looks like it did a good job. So now I can go back to the keys up here. Ooh, let me turn off start. Whew, I almost selected more than I was supposed to. So let me select all these keys up here and move them back down. Just like that. And it looks like it may have cut holes. Okay, so I need to undo. I need to select the keys and move them up a little bit. Just like that. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the base. Pro Boolean is still there, and re-click the keys. There we go, much better. So let me turn off start picking, grab these keys, move them down. Okay, now my keys are a bit, oh no, I can keep moving them down. They are a little too thick. And instead of going through and redoing all my keys, I'm actually just going to go to my base. I'm going to convert it to an editable poly. Go to Polygon. I'm going to drag, actually I'm going to go to vertice. Drag select over the top vertices and just move them up. There. No one will know. Okay, so it looks like I had some minor issues with the space bar. Is that what's going on? Oh, we need to undo. Undo, undo. You're getting to see me make mistakes because I'm not redoing this tutorial. Undo, undo, undo. So this happened because of the scale. Let me go back to element mode. I'm going to select this space bar. And it's way too thick. Bring that in. Okay, it looks like the other ones are okay. There's just a space bar that was way, way too thick. Anything else happen with that? Nope, just a space bar. Okay, so now go back to here. Let's apply the Pro Boolean. Start picking. Oops, I almost did it again. Click my buttons. Move them up a little bit. Almost did it again. There we go. Looking good. Turn it off. In fact, I'm just going to convert it to an editable poly already. Select all my buttons at the top. Move them straight down. Say about there. Click on this. Go to vertex mode again. Drag select over the top vertices. Pull it up. There we go. Okay, so there is my keyboard. Let's go ahead and address, I think the wire comes straight out the back. We'll put that, well, that's using a spline. You can do that on your own. I don't need to show that again. But let's talk about unwrapping each one of these buttons for texturing. So we need to actually combine these buttons into a probably 2 or 3 different texture maps. So let's go ahead and select a bunch. Let's go with the ones from the top row. In fact, actually, I'm going to just hide the... let's see, what should I do with the base? I'm going to freeze it. So I'm going to right click, Object Properties, and Freeze. That way I don't accidentally select it. So I'm going to grab, say, all these buttons, and this is going to be interesting. Actually, I'm just going to grab them all. And let's go create, actually modify panel. And we're going to add a Unwrap UVW map. The Unwrap UVW modifier allows us to take the surfaces of the 3D geometry, cut it up into 2D space to be exported to a 2D program like Photoshop, Illustrator, GIMP, so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and go into Polygon selection. I'm going to zoom out here. Make sure that I'm in the selection mode is inside selection area, and I'm going to click and drag over the top of the polygons, or the buttons I should say, and you can zoom in here and you can see I only have the top selected. All right, zoom back out. All right, so I'm going to go into the Open Up UV editor. Scale this up a little bit. Navigation in this viewport is the same as the 3D viewports. Middle mouse button is pan, and scrolling the middle mouse button zooms in and zooms out. Now there is no 3D rotate because it's 2D space. Okay. So what you're looking at is this checker pattern inside here. This is where all our textures are going to go inside of. We have to fit it inside this box area. Right now, this red area is the selected polygons I have right now. So let's go ahead and go mapping, flatten mapping. Click OK. And it flattens out every single button. So with the move tool, this is your move, rotate, scale, free transform. Free transform does all the above. And then of course you have mirror. Okay. So with the move tool, I'm going to hold down Shift and drag this guy up so he's out of this box area. It's a little laggy. My computer is really old. I know I keep mentioning that. Just trying to get sympathy, you know. So I'm going to drag select over these polygons now, and I'm going to go ahead and go mapping, flatten mapping, click OK, and those are the sides and backs. Now because I'm not going to actually draw any texture on these are just going to be one solid color. I'm going to scale them way down. So I'm going to go to my free transform, roll over the corner, hold down Control, and click and drag to make them really small. And again, I'm doing this because I don't need this to eat up texture space. So I'm going to go to my Move tool. Actually, I'll just stay on my free transform and hold down Shift to drag it over. Okay, so now we've cleaned out the box. Now we want to start packing everything back into this box. First, before I begin, I'm going to go to vertex mode, and I'm going to see if these things are upside down. So I'm going to click and drag over the bottom vertices here, and you can see here that it selected the top vertices in the viewport. That's bad. So we need to flip this around. I'm going to go to polygon mode, drag select over these polygons, and rotate 180 degrees. There we go. Now they're the right side up. Just to make sure, go to vertex mode, drag select, and those are the bottom. All right, so you can see here this is a jumbled mess. I'm not going to be able to recognize what button is what in a 3D or in a 2D program like Photoshop. You can see here this button is way down in the corner. So I want to reorganize this inside this box to where I can understand it. Okay, so let's start by scooting these guys closer to the box. All right, and I'm going to turn on, I'm going to go View, Show Grid. I'm going to go up to the checker pattern here and say Remove Texture, because I want to see this with no texture in it. And now I'm going to go to, let's go Options, Preferences, and I'm going to set the grid size to be smaller. So right here it says grid size. I'm going to say 0.02. And that's better. I think that's going to work. Maybe 0.03. Let's try it. No, let's stick with 2. Oops. Yeah. I want it to stay even with the box. Okay. So now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And I'm going to turn on Snap to Grid. Okay. Now Snap to Grid does not work in Polygon mode, so I need to go into Vertex mode. First off, I'm going to select my first button. So it's this guy, and I'm going to move it down. In fact, let me just grab a couple of these and move them in here. I'm going to hold down Control to select more than one. Okay, and move them down. Just so I know the first list that I got to do. All right, starting off with this one, I'm going to go to Vertex mode, drag select over the vertices. And because I have the snap tool on, when I move this, let me go into Move Tool, it will snap to the grid. Let me go one like that. Okay, so let me go over to the next one. Is this the next? Yep, this is the next button. So let me go ahead and snap it. There we go. And what's the next one? It's this one right here. Same thing. Snap to grid. And the next one. So this is what you're going to do. You're just going to reorganize your buttons to where you know where they're at in the viewport. And I'm actually going to pause this tutorial here in a sec because I'm not going to sit there and do this all day and waste your guys' time. So, yeah, this is exactly how I do it. I just grab my buttons, rearrange them to where I can understand them inside this box. So everything eventually has to go back inside this box. So I'm going to stop this now and I'm going to come back after I'm done rearranging these. And I'm back. I've finished laying out my UVs with inside this box. If you haven't yet, please pause the tutorial before you continue. And I laid mine out from left to right, and I did this section of the keyboard first. Let me deselect. So I did this section of the keyboard first, then I did this small section here, then I did the number keypad, and then the arrows. So my last one is my right arrow, because I did from left to right, and my first one is this icon up here. All right, so we're looking good, and then the rest of my stuff is just crammed here at the bottom. So let's export this. By the way, if you didn't, I actually turned off Show Grid after I was done. Of course, before I had Show Grid on. Now I turn it off, just so I can see the layout better. I was just using the grid as a placement for each piece, and of course the snapping tool down here, which I can turn off. Let me go up to Tools and go to Render UV Template. It's going to render it out as a flat image, like a JPEG, PNG, something like that, that I can use in another program. So I'm going to go Render UV Template. And the first thing that comes up is the scale factor. Now this is 1024 by 1024. That's going to give me an okay image, excuse me, for the keyboard. To be honest, I think that a bigger image is going to be necessary. However, if you're going to use a vector program to texture your keyboard, you can actually bring in a vector as a material in 3D Studio Max. You can you don't have to use JPEGs, PNGs, Targets, TIFFs, that type of thing, which are bitmap images. And the difference between bitmap and vector is vector can be scaled up to infinity and it looks crisp, and bitmaps, you scale them up and they start getting pixelated. So if you're going to use a vector program, which is, I am going to use a vector program, but I will save it out as a bitmap to show you how both ways work. And the reason why I'm using a vector program, which is going to be Illustrator, is because I found a Mac keyboard with all the images, and I'm just going to copy and paste those into my template. Otherwise, you can bring this into Photoshop and literally type out every single key and design every single key yourself. But that sounds extremely time consuming. This was time consuming enough. So anyway, 1024 by 1024 would work if we're going to use vector. It would not work if I'm using bitmaps. And so my suggestion is to bring it up double, 2048 by 2048. Now you need to make sure you keep this square. Even though you can see that we did keep it square in the design, it's also a good idea because when it comes to 3D programs and rendering, they like even numbers that are square for your texture files. It's easier for it to compute the data. And if you really wanted high-res texture, you can go 4096 by 4096, and that's a 4K file. Fill type, it's set to none right now. So if I hit render, it looks like this. And right now I'm seeing this zoomed out. So if I zoom in, middle mouse button, scroll, you can see it's 1 by 1. Okay, so I could leave it like that if I'm fine with texturing like that. Let's test a couple of other options. Sorry. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. Let's go to solid and click render UV template. So this is a solid look, which is nice, but I think the gray is going to be problematic for my keys. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. And then the next mode is normal. Now this one takes a lot longer to render. It's going to render out a normal map. For those of you who are unfamiliar with normal maps, they're basically designed for height maps, and they're color coded to play with the way light interacts with the surface, or how the light is bouncing off the surface, I should say. And then you have shaded, and I think shaded's, let's just test it. I don't remember how long it takes to render shaded. And this is another long one. Ooh, probably shouldn't have done this. So we're waiting. So again, the big thing is size. Make sure it's square and make sure that you're using multiples of 2. And there we go. So that's shaded. And that may or may not work. I'm going to go ahead and close it. I don't think it's going to work. So I'm going to stick with none in this case. I usually like normal, but let me stick with none and go render UV template. And I'm going to go save. I'm going to save it to my texture folder. I'm going to call this keys UVW temp. Okay, so this is just a temporary file. We're going to save it as a JPEG and click save. Best quality, click OK. Okay, now this is saved out. So let's go ahead and close this. And if you did not organize your buttons, you're going to need to leave this open and bounce between 3D Studio Max and whatever program you're going to be editing in. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to close this and go 3D Studio Max. Let me just click the save button. Okay, so let's go ahead and minimize Max for now. Now I'm going to use Illustrator. Again, you can use GIMP, Photoshop, whatever you want. I'm going to click this and I'm going to go File, New, and the size was 2048 by 2048. I can give it a name already. So this is going to be Mac Keys Texture. Okay, so 2048 by 2048. Everything else is good. Click OK. Now, if you're running Photoshop or GIMP, you can just drag and drop your texture into the program. So literally, you can open this up and drag and drop this right into Photoshop or GIMP. Now I'm going to drag and drop it into Illustrator, and I'm going to use my Align tools. I'm going to make sure it's set to Align to Artboard, and click Align to Center on these two options here. So now it's aligned perfectly on layer 1. I'm going to lock the layer. If you're in Photoshop or GIMP, you want to go to your Layers panel and lock it and create a new layer so you don't mess with the original layer. Okay, so like I said, I went online. Actually typed in free vector Mac keyboard, and this right here, site, had a very nice one. Clicked on it, and I clicked download. We'll close this for now. And this is the download that I got. So I'm going to drag and drop this into Illustrator. You can see here's the Mac keys all laid out for me. So I'm going to go ahead and delete a bunch of stuff. So I'm going to use my wide arrow tool. Because it's a vector, there's a bunch of points. Delete, delete. Delete, delete. Getting rid of all the nonsense I don't need. Okay, I'm going to stick with this for now. And I'm going to use my black arrow tool, drag, select over everything, hold down Shift, and make it bigger. In fact, to be honest, it might be safer to go File, New, and let me do a twice the size image, 4096 by 4096. In this case, I don't need to make it perfectly square. Let me drag and drop this stuff into my new file and scale them up. And because it's vector, I can keep scaling it up and it's going to be clean, which is perfect. So let me go ahead and close this. No, I don't want to save. So now let's see if I can actually start extracting these pieces into my new file. So I'm going to go ahead and use my wide arrow tool, drag select over the top of the buttons and hit delete twice. So now I can just focus on these buttons. So let me grab this first set here. Use my black arrow tool, drag them into this file. So it looks like they're almost big enough. Actually, it looks like they are big enough. So let's go ahead and place them in here. I'm going to zoom in. And what we can do to help us see this better, so I'm going to create a new layer. And I'm going to create a square. I'm just going to click in my scene. Just click, not click and drag. And we know it's 2048 by 2048. Click OK. And I'm going to use my align tool again, making sure again align to artboard. And I'm going to set this to white because the mat keys are white. There we go. And I'm actually going to go for right now. Let's open this up. Transparency. And I'm going to lower its transparency so I can see through it. I'm just using this to help divide the black from the dark gray. Go back to my layers and lock it. So now I can just focus on this top layer. So I have escape, can position it. Here's F1. That's good. Well, F2. F3. Probably something like that. F4. So this is exactly how I'm going to texture my buttons. Let's go and grab a couple more, and then I will show you what happens when we put them in to, whoops, need to use my wide arrow tool to grab. So I'm going to go all the way to F8. Wide arrow tool, drag and drop. And these are down in the bottom. So the ones that don't have icons are still in the corner. Something like that. F6, let's bring it over. F7. F8. 3 more buttons. 1, 2, 3. So that brings me to F11. Let me align it. Okay. Grab these guys. F11 looks perfect. Okay, so now I have my first row done. Let me actually just grab the last two, just so you can see how I laid mine out. So these last two are over in this corner. Again, I went left to right, just repeating all the way down. Okay, so there is my first set of keys. Let me go ahead and take this layer here, select it. I unlocked it so I can select it. Go back to my transparency, bring it up to 100%. Let me go File, Save. And I'm going to save this directly on Mac Texture Keys. 3DX, Texture. Mac Keys Texture, I don't know why it's... Okay, I'm just replacing it. Click OK. And now if I go File, Export, I'm going to export this as a PNG. So like if you're in Photoshop, you can just save as, or GIMP save as, but in this case, I got to export as a PNG. And excuse me, Mac keys texture, that's fine as a PNG, export. And again, I'm saving it to the texture folder. Screen resolution, 72 dpi. Screens don't go any higher than 72 dpi, so there's no reason to go above this. And everything else is good. Click OK. Now I can minimize this. Go back to 3D Studio Max. Let's go to Material. Let's go to a blank material, which this one I believe is a blank. I'll call it Mac Key Texture. And just to be quick about this, I'm going to, here's my Mac Key Texture. I'm going to just drag and drop it. Oops, it created a new material. So let me just call this one Mac Key Texture. Okay. So now that that's done or imported, again, it's imported in the diffuse slot right here. It says M. I'm going to click and drag over all my keys. I'm actually going to turn off UVW map. Okay, all my keys are selected. I'm going to hit apply to selection. And now I can close this and zoom in here, and voila. In fact, actually, let me go ahead. You can see all my top keys right there are textured, and let me go render. Voila. Let me zoom in on the render. You can see it looks pretty clean, even zoomed in, because we have a large texture file. And like I said, you can now actually import a vector file. So let me go back to here. Not sure you can drag and drop it the same way, but let's test it. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this out by dragging and dropping a blank slot. Excuse me. And let me click on the little box. Maps. I think it's still vector map right here. That's what we want to check. Click open. And we're going to click from vector file. And we're going to choose 3D texture, Mac keys texture, open. All right, so now it's doing the same thing, only using the vector file. So one way or the other. Now, there has been an issue I've seen lately, and this wasn't an issue in the past, and let's test it. If I try saving this file, well, let me add a couple new buttons. So the next row down is going to be this one. Let me use my white arrow tool to delete. Let me just delete these guys so I know which areas I'm working on. Excuse me. Okay, so let me grab the first 4. Whoops. White arrow tool. I guess I'm going to grab the first 5. Drag and drop in here. I'm going to hide. Oh, no, I don't want to hide it. We want to change the transparency again. And I think I just dragged this in the wrong layer. I did. So let me undo, undo, undo. There. Let me change the transparency first. Something like that. Lock it. Go back to here. Now let's drag and drop. It's very crucial that we make sure we're setting up our stuff on the right layer. Okay, so did I grab too much from this file? Oh no, that's fine. Let's go ahead and hit, these need to be raised a little bit. Might need to move this over. Okay, anyway, so let's go ahead and hit File, Save, and it may give me an error message saying it can't save. Oh, good, it didn't. Whew! Because I was working in Photoshop the other day in the new 3D Studio Max, and it did the same. I saved out of Photoshop, and I was bringing in the Photoshop file, because yes, you can import the Photoshop file, and Photoshop wouldn't save on top of it. It was saying that that particular file was being used by another program. So eventually I just had to import the PNGs. I had to save twice, a Photoshop file and a PNG, so I wouldn't run into that problem. And let's see if it updated in here. Okay, it didn't update, so let me go ahead and go into the material and click reload. And there we have it. It updated. Okay, so that's exactly how we're going to go through and texture the keys. And like I said, the sides are all going to share the same color. So back into here, this is just going to be solid white. And once I'm done, I will take this middle layer and take the transparency up to 100%. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I'm going to go ahead and finish texturing each key. There's nothing spectacular different than what we've already done. So I'm going to stop the tutorial here, or I'm going to pause the tutorial, and then I'll pick it up after I'm done. I finished laying out all my buttons. So you can see here everything is in its place, its proper place. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to this layer, make sure it's unlocked. And I'm going to lock the top layer. I'll call this layer buttons. This layer back. And this layer ref. Okay, so the back layer, I'm going to select it and make sure I go to transparency and dial it all the way up. So it's 100%. And I'm going to click save. All right, I'm going to close Illustrator, clear clipboard, and jump back into 3D Studio Max. Okay, so now I'm back in 3D Studio Max. I can say reload, and all my keys are now properly textured. Yay. And you can see here, because the sides were in that one area, it's white as well. All right, so then I can just tweak. I'm going to go to the top of the material. I can tweak it a little bit, add a little bit of shine, because these buttons are kind of plastic. Something like that. And then I just need to throw a white material. It's actually more of a grayish white onto this base. So let's find another blank material slot. Let's go back up now. Yeah, back up to here. Mac. Let's say Mac keyboard base. Okay. So I'm going to go right click, unfreeze all. So I can unfreeze it. Remember, we had frozen this before. I'm going to select it, apply to selection, maybe a little bit brighter, and add some reflection to it. I'm going to go back to my reference image of this. Okay, so it's a lot darker. Okay, there we have it. Click render. And voila, there's our Mac keyboard. Okay, so I'm going to close out all this. I'm going to go ahead and save. And let's go ahead, let's see, Mac keyboard. Oh, we do have one more piece, and that's the top piece, the cable. So I would do it the same way I've done it before. I'd start by creating a cylinder. And let's go ahead, do this in this viewport. I'm going to click and draw a cylinder. Okay. So let's see the position of the cylinder. It's going to be more towards the top. It's going to be even. Let me set the base to the keyboard. Let's decrease the radius. Change the height to go in the other direction. I don't need height segments. Probably something like that. Pull it back. Okay, this is going to be material. This is going to share the same material as the back of the keyboard or the monitor. So Mac chord this one. Apply material to the selection because I have it selected. And I'm going to set the X value to 0 because I know it's supposed to be right in the center of the keyboard. All right. So there's our cylinder. Now, I could group this stuff by selecting everything and saying group. A lot of users say that's not a good idea. I don't think it really matters, especially for a scene like this, if you group everything. So let's go ahead and do that. Just select everything and go edit. Or sorry, group. And I'll call this keyboard. And actually, I don't want to do that yet. I want to add the chord. So let's go ahead and go to the Create panel, Shapes, Line. And let's click and draw a line. I'm just adding some points because, again, I don't know where these points need to go. So that's probably good enough. And I'll, again, go to the Modify panel, Rendering, Enable and Render, Enable and Viewport. Decrease the thickness, something like that. And I think we're good to go. Let's apply the same material. Apply to selection. We can call this Mac Keyboard Chord. Okay, there we go. All right, so now let's select everything. Do I want to group it yet? Nope. So I'm going to go ahead and select everything in my scene. I'm going to right click and unhide all. And I'm going to move this up to the top of the glass. This blue line right here is the top of the glass. So about there. There we go. And I'll pull it forward. Okay. Now before I group, let's see what happens when I group this. I don't want to lose the editing of the chord, so I'm going to go ahead and select the chord right now. Go to the vertex mode and start pushing these vertices around. I'm going to turn off Enable and Viewport just so I can see the vertices. Vertex. Grab this last one and drag it way over here. It actually gets plugged into the monitor. Now I could build the plugin and all that, but to be honest, I'm not going to worry about all that. That's using a box and shaping it into the end of the plug. You guys can do that. You don't need me to show you how to do that. Okay, so I'm just going to offset some of these to be a little more sporadic. Yeah, maybe something like that. Move this a little. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just select these ones in here in the center, right click on them, and say smooth. So I get more of that smooth look. And I can play with position. I don't want it going through the glass, so let's keep it above the glass. There we go. So enable and viewport, turn that back on. And the one that's going to the back side of the keyboard needs to go way over here into the USB slot. So it looks like I'll have to readjust this. Something like that. Okay, so that looks good. Let me go ahead and Alt-W this viewport. Now that I have the keyboard and the chord done, I'm going to group this stuff. Well, do I want to group it? I do want to group. I'm going to group this guy. I'm going to control click the keyboard. I need to select all the buttons. So let me just go to my naming convention or naming selection. And I'm going to select these first. So I'm going to click on the first one, shift click on the last one, and click OK. So that grabs all the keys for me. I'm going to control click on the keyboard and control click on this plug, and I'm going to say group. Mac keyboard. All right, so now this is all one object. So anytime I grab this, it moves as one object. Ooh, I missed something. Oh no, that's the reference image. Okay, so let's get rid of that reference image. I'm gonna hide this, hide selection, grab this, and hit delete. I don't need it anymore. Right click, unhide all. And there we have it. There is our setup. So anytime I move the keyboard, I'll have to readjust the vertices for the chord. All right, so let's just position this, do a quick little render, see where we're at. Not looking too bad. I'm getting reflection in the monitor. We haven't done the texture in the monitor area. That's okay, we will do that later. Final touches probably. Let's see, is there anything else? No, this looks about right. It's looking good. Okay, so let's go ahead and call this for part 4 and go ahead and join me for part 5.